Welcome to All Things Policy, a daily podcast by the Takshashila Institution. We are a bunch of policy nerds based in Bengaluru, and we like bringing fresh perspectives to Indian affairs and Indian perspectives to global affairs. So grab a cup of coffee, sit back, and join us for today's chat.
August 2025 was a very special day for Bangalore. On that day, Prime Minister Narendra Modi inaugurated the long-awaited, the long-delayed yellow metro line here in the city. And this is about a 19-kilometer corridor that links RV Road to Bommasandra. And the area that it is serving sees one of the worst traffic jams and gridlock in the city. So when this line was inaugurated, people were happy, commuters were happy that they'll have an option which will help them travel decent distances in a decent frame of time, very reliable and so on. So the hopes were high, and the inauguration also was publicized a lot. But more than a month after the yellow line was inaugurated, what we are seeing rather are long wait times at the stations. The stations are crowded. And the potential of this line, right, this 19-kilometer line, the kind of ridership it can actually take, it's only seeing a limited ridership. Its full potential is not being realized. So why is this happening? Why is yellow line still facing issues, right? We understand it was delayed and now also it's facing issues. And believe it or not, geopolitics has a role to play with it, right? So geopolitics is not just this thing happening in foreign lands, things like what our foreign policy folks are doing in distant embassies and so on, or what our companies are involved in different jurisdiction and so on. Geopolitics also touches our lives, the lives of ordinary commuters in Bangalore. So to discuss this, I have with me Tannmay, who has, along with Pranay, and both are researchers with the High-Tech Geopolitics program. Tannmay is an adjunct junior scholar, and Pranay heads the High-Tech Geopolitics program. They have done a study on this, and they've called it provocatively Geopolitics of Bengaluru's Yellow Metro Line. And they've published a discussion document out of it. It's quite interesting, the kind of findings they have and the recommendations they make. So Tannmay is joining me today to discuss more of how this geopolitics is impacting commuters' lives. And I'm Lokendra. I work in the High-Tech Geopolitics program as well. So Tannmay, let us start with some very basics. It's for the benefit of our listeners. What is the geopolitics of it, right? Why did geopolitics impact Yellow Line? Why were there delays in even getting this line started? How many train sets do we actually have, and who's the supplier and so on? So just the basics for our listeners.
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Tannmay. So let's get right into it, right? So the Yellow Line has just been recently inaugurated. It's just been a month, like Lokendra said. And the interesting thing about the Yellow Line and the genesis for the entire geopolitical angle was its supplier. So the Yellow Line was the first metro line in the Bangalore metro network that used a Chinese supplier or that had contracted a Chinese supplier, right? Previously, the two lines that are already operational and have been running for almost 10 years now, that is the green line and the purple line. The train sets for those lines were purchased from a consortium of two companies, namely BEML, Bharat Earth Movers Limited, which is a Bangalore-based PSU, and Hyundai, which is a South Korean company. So the rolling stock for the previous lines was purchased from a consortium of these two companies, but this time around with the Yellow Line, the government continued following its L1 model of procurement, and with following this model, a Chinese company called CRRC, which stands for China Railway Rolling Stock Corporation, which is a Chinese government company. It's a Chinese PSU. It won the contract because of the L1 system. Essentially, what happened was this company, CRRC, had the lowest bid out of all the other bidders when it came to the rolling stock. So the government had intended to buy 36 train sets, 15 of which would go for the yellow line, and 21 which would have gone for the extensions on the green and purple line. So this was part of the phase two of the metro, of Bangalore's metro system. Phase one had the green and purple lines. Phase two was extensions of those lines and three new lines, namely yellow line, blue line, and pink line. So when this contract was signed in 2019, CRRC was the cheapest bidder. The number that CRRC quoted per coach was rupees 7.3 crores, which was cheaper than Indian competitor BEML, which had quoted a figure of 9.2 crores per coach. And so, as per the L1 procurement system, the government gave the order to CRRC in 2019 at 7.3 rupees per coach.
Tanmay, we'll go into the specifics of the bidding process. But before we go into that, so okay, what I understand from you is that a Chinese supplier got the contract for supplying a certain number of train sets, and some of those train sets were meant for the yellow line, right? And what happened then, right? If everything was going smooth, why were there so many delays, and how did geopolitics come into play? We'll come into the bidding process later,
Sure.
but first the geopolitics. Yeah.
Right. So the reason why geopolitics came into this were two primary reasons, right? First and the most important was the Galwan Valley clash that happened in 2020. As a result of this, the union government sitting in Delhi imposed a whole new set of restrictions as with regards to FDI inflow and contracts with neighboring countries that included China, of course, right? So, as per these, they introduced two new amendments to the financial procurement rules. One was an amendment to the FDI rule and as to how FDI comes into India, and the second was an amendment to the general financial rules. Specifically, they added a clause 144 XI. The cumulative effect of both these developments, these changes that were a result of the Galwan Valley clash, was that all contracts that had been entered into a supplier that was one of India's bordering nations had to go through a reapproval process with the union government, as these rules were applicable retroactively. They had to go through a reapproval process. All the components that had to come had to be reapproved, and the FDI inflow was also to be much more tightly regulated by the union government. And as a result of a general anti China political climate developing in Delhi and in India, the effects of this compounded, and slowly a lot of delays started to creep in. For example, the Chinese staff who had to be present at the Bangalore site at the site in India to get the manufacturing going, right? The technical staff who were from CRRC, they were not allowed visas to come to India and get the manufacturing site going for almost 2 years. And similarly, for a lot of components were not allowed to be imported from China, and they were stuck in the approval process. As a result of all this, there was the delays compounded, and that's where the geopolitical angle comes in.
Thanks, Tanmay. So, one thing I've often wondered is when we had the previous two lines in Bangalore, right? And the whole process of building those previous two lines, I think, started somewhere around 2006, 2007, around that time,
Yes.
right? And we had two lines coming up. And as you pointed out, the supplier of train sets for these two lines were not Chinese, right?
Right. Yeah.
Right? They were. Was it an Indian supplier, BEML,
Yes. Correct.
for both
It
these
was a
lines?
yes. It was a consortium between BEML and Hyundai, so it was an India-Korea partnership.
Okay. So when we already had a successful procurement strategy that had worked well, and I think the very first metro line that Bangalore had came up reasonably in a reasonably good time frame. Uh, so when we had such a good procurement strategy in place, when we had an Indian consortium, maybe BML with South Korea and so on, BML with Hyundai working, why would we even go to a Chinese supplier, right? And that too at a time when I understand that Galwan clashes had not taken place, but it wasn't as if India-China relations were in a very good spot either, right?
Right.
So, and there were definitely geopolitical risks involved in such a high value procurement from China. So, why was this done? And maybe you can throw some light on the bidding process as well. Why
Sure.
did this actually happen? Yeah. And then when you answer that, do please throw some light also on what are these non-Chinese suppliers, right? And who do we usually procure from?
Sure. So let's attack the question from the back, right? So why, and let's start with the bidding process. The bidding process that the government has followed for decades now, and the process that it followed for the yellow line procurement is a process called the L1, or lowest one system of procurement. As per this system of procurement, it's a very simple system, right? The government does not pay consideration to technical specifications, technical superiority, or any other factors, including geopolitical factors, risk management factors, delay factors, or previous confidence. They have a very rudimentary checklist that the supplier must meet. The supplier must be able to supply the technical specifications they're looking for. But beyond that, there is not necessarily a quota for quality or for timeliness that is factored into the system. The system is simple as long as you meet a very basic baseline criteria, and if you meet that criteria and you are the lowest cost supplier, then the government will automatically prefer you. This is encoded policy. So every time this system is invoked, the government must, or the government entity purchasing must go with the lowest cost supplier. They cannot then switch to a higher cost supplier, right? So this is what happened in 2019. As I was saying, CRRC was significantly cheaper than the other suppliers. The numbers were CRRC was offering rupees 7.2 crores per quote, as compared to the BEML, with the Bharat Earth Movers Limited, that was offering 9.2 crores per quote. Both of these numbers were interestingly lower than what we paid for the green and purple line, which evened out to just about 10 rupees 10 crore per coach. But because BMRCL, that is Bangalore Metro Rail Corporation Limited, had to follow the L1 system, they eventually went with CRRC, right? Now, this is where the discrepancy in the bidding system comes in, and this is where me and Pranay delve into our recommendation, which is adopting the QCBS, or quality come base selection model of bidding. But if you have any questions, you can. I think
Yes,
I
Tanmay, we'll come to it's a nice, interesting recommendation of the QCBS thing you've made. We'll come to that maybe subsequently. But before that, one part of my question was, can you throw some light on the non-Chinese suppliers? Who these are, right?
Oh
So
yeah,
you said BEML. Maybe a bit more about what BEML actually is, and then a bit more about Hyundai, and I think Bombardier is another one. And there's something else also, right, in this market in India? So can you please throw some light? Yeah.
sure. So eventually, when the bidding was happening in 2019, right? Other than BML and CRRC, there were two other major suppliers that were also in the running. Those suppliers are Alstom and Bombardier. Both are international companies. Both have built metro lines before across the world, and BML has noticeable track record in building lines in India, in building rolling stock for lines in India. It has built the rolling stock, as I mentioned, for the Bangalore line before, and it has also worked on smaller
What's
projects.
the full form of BEML?
BML is Bharat Earth Movers Limited. It's an Indian PSU. It's based out of Bangalore. And other than BML, all the bidders at this stage were foreign companies, Hyundai being from Korea and Bombardier and Alstom being Western companies, right?
So I do remember while traveling in Delhi Metro, for instance, I do remember seeing some of these names,
Right.
uh, like of the other non-Chinese players and
Yeah.
also foreign players, right?
Yeah.
So that means we have done procurement from those people as well in the past, right?
That's right.
So we've had a relationship in terms of for Delhi Metro, Bangalore Metro with all these players in the past, right?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, so we have procured from multiple sources before, right? And eventually, what happened in the case of the yellow line as well was eventually when the delays compounded a lot and BMRCL was getting, a little upset that that the rolling stock was not being delivered by CRRC, and following a by following a legal judgment. Eventually, what happened was the compromise that was agreed upon was that instead of CRRC delivering the rolling stock itself by creating a manufacturing facility in India, it would collaborate and do a JV with another Indian manufacturer, which is called Titagarh Rail Systems Limited, right? TRSL. Now, this is the second player, the second major rolling stock player in the Indian market. However, Titagarh has not explicitly worked on metro projects before, which is why this had to be done as a JV and the contract would not simply be reallocated to TRSL. But the plus point now is that TRSL has manufactured this, although in JV with CRRC within India. So I'm hoping that the technology transfer and some of the knowledge transfer has happened. And I think my sense now is that TRSL is also a player we should see who bids on future rolling stock, right? So, for example, for the new tenders that are going to be floated with the pink line, we should see bids from TRSL. So, yeah, that's a brief outline of who the different suppliers are, international suppliers, primarily one Indian supplier, one upcoming Indian supplier, and CRRC.
What you're essentially saying is that when geopolitics around 2020 played a role in the delay, the issue was actually resolved by a joint venture between CRRC and Titagarh, right? So the train sets that are actually running on Yellow Line right now are a joint venture product between an Indian and a Chinese company. Is that correct?
Yeah. So, in any case, the train sets would have been manufactured in India. From the start, the plan was that out of the 36 total train sets, 34 would be manufactured in India and 2 would have been manufactured in China. The initial plan was that CRRC would set up its own factory in India, in Sri City in Andhra Pradesh, and it would manufacture it from there. But because of the FDI rules and because of the component import rules, this plan was later changed to a JV with TRSL. So TRSL is the owner of the factory now. TRSL is doing the manufacturing, and CRRC is more on an advisory basis. So that's its role in the JV.
Okay, so now how many train sets do we have operational on the Yellow Line, and how many there were supposed to be? How do the numbers look like?
Yeah. So as of now, we have only 3 train sets on the Yellow Line. The planned capacity for the Yellow Line was 15.
1.5.
Yeah, 1.5.
Okay.
So we are operating at 1/5 of the capacity, which is why we see the delays, right?
That is woefully low, right? So my
Yes.
sense is that you have a 19-kilometer line. So it's not a very short line also. It's not too long, but it's not also not too short. And you only have 3 train sets, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
You know what my worry is? My worry is that what if there are some maintenance issues, right? Because you're running these 3 train sets to their peak capacity, I think, right?
Hmm.
What if there's some faults, mechanical faults or electrical faults or otherwise in one of these train sets,
Hmm.
and that has to stay in the maintenance shed for a few days, and
Yeah.
that will immediately spike the delay times, right? It may even
Absolutely.
substantially spike the delay times. So
Yeah.
that's what my fear is, right? It's 1/5 of the capacity is too less for a very much in demand Yellow Line, right?
Correct. So let me just walk you through the numbers there, right? So we're running at 3 train sets out of 15. That means that our times between trains are currently around 25 to 30 minutes. So it takes, if you're waiting on the Yellow Line and if a train has just passed by, you can expect to see another train in another 25 minutes. The plan for this was 4 to 5 minutes. So you can see how the delta has just changed like significantly, right? A commuter at that point, it makes more sense for a commuter to just bear with the traffic and in the moving traffic actually get to their destination faster rather than waiting on the overcrowded stations for 25 minutes for the metro line. Other than this, I'll also touch base upon this because we're talking about the train technology and the low number of trains. So interestingly, there was a proposal back in 2022 when the civil construction was complete, but they were waiting on the trains to shift some trains from the green and purple lines to the yellow line, right? So that they could at least get it running. And that seems to be the philosophy that they have done now also, because clearly the yellow line is not at its full capacity. So they just got it running irrespective of, to show the public that, hey, you know what, the yellow line has at least started, even if it's not working at its full capacity. So even back in 2022, there was a similar proposal that if the trains are not coming, let's borrow 3 to 4 trains from the other lines and get it running. And this is where we come into the very interesting technical aspect of train signaling and why yellow line trains can work on green and purple lines, but green and purple lines trains cannot work on yellow lines, right? Um, Now, the reason behind this is a difference in the signaling mechanism. The yellow line trains use CBTC, which is a new signaling mechanism. It's a driverless signaling mechanism. It's called communications based train control, right? It's driverless capable, although you can have a driver. In comparison with this, the older trains that are running on the purple and green lines use automatic train protection, which is a human in the loop driver system. So this uses fixed block signaling, and that's the core technological difference. That use the purple and green line trains that use automatic train protection use fixed block signaling, as compared to the yellow line which uses moving block signaling, right? So now the main problem that happens is that the train shell itself, the body of the train is just hardware. The difference is in the software that it's running. Now, if you wanted to pick up a train from the green or purple line and place it and run it on the yellow line, you would need to change the software that is operating on the green and purple line, and you would need to change the entire controlling and coordinating mechanism. And even if that is plausible, that would mean new security tests, that would mean new infrastructure tests, that would mean new operational testing, and the delay that would generate is much higher. So at that point, that's why that was not considered as a viable option.
No, that's an interesting line of thought, because the executives at Bangalore Metro would have wondered, right, whether we can use some of the trains from here and use them on the yellow line, right? So, but I understand the way you explained, right? It would lead to, in its own way, a set of delays and cost overruns, because the signaling mechanism would have to be now adapted to a different technology, right? A rolling stock that runs on different technology, right? So, but in the present circumstance, in the way things have transpired, what is the quantum of cost overrun that yellow line has seen? Do you have the figures for that?
Yes. So let me take you through those, right? Initially, like we discussed, the rolling stock for the yellow line was supposed to be procured at a total cost of 1578 crore, which
Okay.
meant 216 coaches at rupees 7.3 per coach, right? And including everything, this came out to, including the civil construction, this came out to a figure of approximately 5,000 to 6,000, 5,000 crores, 5,300 crores, right? Including the civil construction and everything. So that was the initial budget for the yellow line.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, but the final figure that taxpayers actually paid for the yellow line was rupees 7,600 crores, right? Which
Okay.
is a 32% jump from our initial estimates or what we had planned. This final price tag, that is of 7,600 crores, puts the per kilometer cost of the yellow line at 400 crores per kilometer, which is significantly higher than other metro lines, both in India and in other developing countries like Indonesia, right? For reference, an example that comes to mind is Kochi Metro. Kochi Metro was developed at a cost of around 200 crore per kilometer, right? And even the older lines, that is the purple and the green lines, their cost evened out at around 320 crore per kilometer.
Tanmay, one of the reasons, sorry for interrupting you, but one of the
No, no, of
reasons I
course.
think the costs in Bangalore when it comes to big projects like this tends to be higher is because land acquisition cost, labor cost, construction cost, everything is at a premium, right?
Right.
Everything may be more than what is in Kochi or even in other developing countries, right?
Absolutely.
So
Yeah.
maybe that is one factor. Also,
Hmm.
if you can just tell us the specific of, uh, in terms of just the rolling stock,
Hmm.
have there been cost overruns as well?
Yes. So the total cost overrun that can be attributable to just the rolling stock is around 1,800 crores. This is not a figure that says that the rolling stock initially would have costed X amount, but now it costed us Y amount. Because on paper, the rolling stock was still delivered at the initial contract value, right? But the delay in rolling stock came with a whole new set of expenses to keep the civil construction pending, and the other operational expenses that had to be carried
Yeah,
out, the setting up of the new factory, all of that, right? So these expenses is what this 1,800 crore price tag comes out to. And just to put it in comparison, the initial cost saving that we had gotten ourselves by choosing CRRC, that was a Chinese supplier, over something like Bombardier or BML, was around 400 crores. So if you had chosen BML, we would have paid 400 crores extra.
yeah.
If you had chosen Bombardier, we would have paid 200 crores extra. So when you compare that to the 1,800 crores we eventually did end up paying for choosing the cheaper line, That really
Hmm.
puts the numbers into perspective. For choosing a cheaper supplier, that really puts the numbers into perspective.
Okay, so for the benefit of our listeners, I think it's useful to clarify that, whenever metro lines are built in India, the usual model that is followed is a heavy investment. And in this case, it's closer to $1 billion, right?
Yeah,
That has gone into this 19-kilometer line, right? And this investment will be recovered by whoever has made this investment. So all the ticket prices that commuters pay doesn't just go into operations like maintaining day-to-day operations, but a bit of it also goes into recovering that investment, right?
right.
So whenever a mega project like this is lying unused, it's not being used, right? So no commuters are paying any ticket prices, for instance. The cost implication of that is huge. So any mega project, right, be it a expressway, be it a metro project, or even a normal train project, and so on, if it's lying unused, it's going to generate its own set of costs just to keep it that way. So I think what Tanmay you're trying to say here is that the cost that was being saved by going with the L1 bidder, which in this case happened to be a Chinese supplier, ultimately, because of the geopolitical induced delays, taxpayers ended up paying much more, right? And that is why
Absolutely.
you and Pranay have suggested that we should take geopolitical risks into account, geopolitical uncertainties into account whenever we do such a public project, such a construction project, and so on. So, can you walk us through what are the policy lessons and recommendations that you both drew from this experience?
Sure. So, right, we see two main policy lessons from this, right? First is on the nature of the contracts itself and the nature of the contracting parties, more specifically. The first and most important policy lesson is that your long term or any government's long term, your infrastructure procurement must match your long term strategic posture. Because we have structural differences with China that are not going to evaporate in the next decade or the next few years, right? So, when you do infrastructure procurement, you must be cognizant of that fact. Now, there's a few things that come into play here. Neither are we recommending that you do not buy from China at all, because China is a cheap supplier, and often buying from China is going to be beneficial to you. But the point is that when you, as the government entity, do purchase from China, then you must ring fence such infrastructure projects from other geopolitical tensions or from any other potential geopolitical causes of delay, right? What happened here was that because of procurement rule changes and financial rule changes, the metro line in Bangalore was impacted by the Galwan Valley clash in Ladakh, right? And the message here is that you should definitely have whatever signaling you need to do to the Chinese whenever there are geopolitical tensions. But if you take that out on your own infrastructure projects, then the harm comes to the Indian taxpayers itself, right? Because China in itself has not borne any cost from this. China that there has been no loss to China or the Chinese government or Chinese taxpayers. The ultimate cost was to the Indian taxpayers who had to pay 1,800 crores extra. So that is the first policy recommendation. Ring fence your infrastructure projects. Keep in mind before you go enter into contract with a Chinese supplier, ask the question of whether it is worth it to take that geopolitical risk in the first place. If it is, then protect the infrastructure project from any geopolitical tensions. If it isn't, then pay the cost premium and go with a more reliable supplier, right? From a geopolitical angle. Now, one good way that you can do this is through an investment review mechanism. And this is something that had been developed by Manoj Kevalramani from the China Studies program at the Takshashila Institution. Essentially, the concept of such a mechanism is that you gradate your infrastructure procurement and you do different levels of screening for all of them. For low risk consumer segments, you can have automatic procurement, things like just your everyday consumer products. You don't really need a lot of screening for that. But for higher risk, infrastructure procurements like defense, telecom, these type of things, you can have higher levels of scrutiny, right? By implementing something like this, you can still buy from China and ensure that you don't later have to do anything, or you later don't have to bear the cost. Your taxpayers don't have to bear the cost. So that is the first recommendation. That is, match your infrastructure procurement with your long-term strategic goals. And once you commit to it, once you eat your cake, you must have it too. You cannot later switch your philosophy when it comes to dealing with a particular geopolitical player. The second is within the system itself. It's within the Indian procurement system, and it is a broader policy lesson that applies to almost all of infrastructure procurement. That is weighing between L1 and QCBS. Me and Pranay believe that QCBS is a better approach to go. And the core differences between L1 and QCBS are as follows. L1 is discussed. It just needs a technical baseline. You just need to meet certain criteria. And as long as you meet those certain criteria and you are the cheapest player, you get the contract. So it's always ultimately the cheapest player who gets the contract under the L1 system, right? The QCBS system is more advanced, it's more nuanced. There are different subscores within the QCBS system that total to a composite score, right? And the manufacturer with the highest composite score gets the contract instead of just price. Price is a factor that affects your the QCBS composite score, but there are also other factors, right? Like technical superiority, quality, previous delays, supplier reputation, and these factors can also include geopolitical factors. Like, for example, they can include supply chain risk, they can include exposure to political restrictions. All of these are already baked within the QCBS system, and if necessary, can be expanded a little, right? So that's why we think that the QCBS system is a much better way of doing government procurement, because it factors in a wider variety of things that you should think about before you commit to a supplier, right?
So I'll just ask you a question. Right? It makes sense to think about QCBS because it's taking into account geopolitical risks, uncertainties, long-term strategic approach, and so on. But one of the reasons, and let's go down to the basics, right? One of the reasons government of India, government of Karnataka, or any government or any public sector entity or a manufacturer or a construction giant would prefer an L1 bidding process is because it takes care of corruption in some ways. It takes care of, and why does corruption happen, right? Corruption would happen wherein there's some subjectivity in the process, wherein the bidding process involves making some subjective decisions by a certain set of people who are in the decision making group, right? So L1 took care of that. It simply said, as long as you meet these mandatory checklist items, let's say, for instance, the coaches should have these basic technologies in them, have an air conditioning in them that works in this temperature range. You can go as granular as you want, have these many seats. It can be quality standards, it can be just about numbers, and so on. As long as you meet all those standards, maybe also one example that comes to my mind is the rolling stock should have a life of maybe 10 years or 20 years. There might be some maintenance items in it as well. So as long as you meet those items, and if you are the cheapest bidder, if you are offering something that is literally L1, like the lowest bid, then you are granted that bid. So, and that takes care of all the subjectivities and the discretions involved. So there is no kickback, right, to the officials who are making these decisions. So there was good reason why such a model came into place. We know the corruption issue is a huge issue, right, and that had to be taken. What you suggest, QCBS, makes sense, right? It takes into account all the uncertainties with geopolitics and long-term planning. But at the same time, it would give some level of discretion, some level of subjectivity to those who are involved. So how do you take care of that?
Right. So that's absolutely correct, right? That is the main disadvantage of the QCBS system as compared to the L1 system. Whenever there is subjectivity in the system, there is always the scope for corruption. And there are a few ways you could solve for this. You could increase the price component within the QCBS, the composite score. You could make the price component a little more reflective of the score. You could give it greater weightage within the score. But fundamentally, that is a difference that will remain, and that is the weighing you have to do, right? So you have to choose. You have to qualitatively apply these two different procurement frameworks based on project. For something like a big scale infrastructure project like Bangalore's Yellow Line, I feel that in retrospect, QCBS would have been better. For smaller scale procurement that maybe is just domestic procurement or does not need to, account for that many factors, then you should apply the L1 framework, right, to minimize corruption. The
I think
core way,
one way Tanmay might be to have the QCBS methodology being so strong and robust and vetted by some of the best, statisticians and experts and researchers, not just in India. Maybe we can consult externally also, get it independently audited, verified, and validated, and put it out in the public domain. And don't modify methodologies on a case by case basis. Let's say yellow line is coming up in Bangalore, so we have a new methodology for selecting the bidder. Maybe some line is coming up in Delhi, we'll have a different methodology for that. Don't keep on changing that. Maybe involve the central government, involve the state governments, involve all the stakeholders, involve all the suppliers in this area, get them together, get all the inputs to a multi-stakeholder input process, and frame this QC-based methodology for selection, right? So you'll have the methodology clearly stating how the weightage would be assigned. I think that is where the most
yeah,
discretion and subjective part is. And one of the things that is possible is make the whole process as objective as possible, right?
hmm,
So even the weightage process, try to see if some numbers can be put into how those weights are arrived at, right? And then publish it out, put it in the public domain, and then apply it across all metro projects, not just in one project or another project, but across all metro projects. I think that may be one way in which subjectivity can be reduced but not completely eliminated, right? that's
right.
that's one. So we'll move to before we conclude, Tanmay, and I think some of your answers were really interesting and illuminating, and commuters traveling in yellow line would have a far better picture of why they have to wait for so long to get a metro. But before we move to concluding this all things policy episode, I want to ask you something that is in the minds of a lot of folks who have traveled across India and have seen different metros in action. And whenever someone travels in Bangalore metro, right, and if they have also traveled to Delhi, for instance, one of the questions that will pop into their mind is, hey, why is Delhi doing it so better, right? When you look at, and when I say Delhi metro, I mean Delhi NCR as well, right? So when you
Hmm,
travel to Delhi, you land at the airport or you go by train, you go by bus. No matter where you go, you'll have a metro station adjacent or nearby. The kind of coverage, metro density, the network they have is really good, and the interconnections are a lot, right? All the lines are intersecting at some point or other, and no matter where you are, a metro station is just around the corner. The same is not the case with Bangalore, right? Some parts of Bangalore are very poorly covered, right? Completely left out of the metro map, and only some parts are covered. And then the wait times, if you look at the yellow line in Delhi, right, the wait times during peak hours are very, very small, right? You'll have a metro coming on the Delhi yellow line in every 1 or 2 minutes in extremely peak hours, right, of the evening. And in Bangalore, we are seeing very extended wait lines. So this comparison with Delhi often pops up, right? So what has Delhi done different? Why have they been able to build so many metro lines? Their network is expanding very fast. They have a lot of rolling stock as well. And Bangalore is playing catch up. While Bangalore also was one of the earliest movers, right, in 2006 and 7. I think one of the earliest mover in the country. Maybe Delhi started before it. Kolkata, I think, started before. But otherwise, I think Bangalore was a fairly early mover. So, any impressions on this?
Yeah, so this is a really interesting question. And although I cannot say that I know too much about Delhi's metro line, I have been reading up on it. I have a few preliminary observations, but this is definitely something I'd like to explore a little further. Right? Just off the top of my head, the few observations I would have is that firstly, yes, so that the first mover advantage is big when it comes to Delhi, right? Because just to put it in perspective, the first line for the Delhi Metro, the first phase, was inaugurated way back in 24 December 2002. So way back in 2002, before even Bangalore Metro's planning started, the Delhi Metro already had one phase operational. It already had one phase operational, and the planning for the other phases was already ongoing, right? So almost like 4 years before the Bangalore Metro had even started the planning process, let alone the construction and open and inauguration process, the Delhi Metro had a little was already ongoing. So that's the first reason I think Delhi Metro has been around for a lot longer. The planning has been going around for a lot longer. So there has been also, when you come to metro lines and other infrastructure projects, right, there's a lot of planning that goes into it. You need to produce DPRs, like detailed planning reports, and you need to submit it to multiple levels of government, get a lot of approvals. So that process started a lot earlier. So that's the first reason. Second reason was, and I think this is the more interesting reason, right, that I don't think that way back in 2001 to 2006, when the proposals for Bangalore Metro were being solidified and when the whole planning was being done, we foresaw how much Bangalore would grow within the next decade, right? Between 2006 to, let's say, 2025, these almost 20 years. Because back when the phase one was planned, it was quite a conservative planning by general standards, right? Because it was only two lines, two intersecting lines. And other than that, nothing else was planned for Bangalore Metro. And it wasn't until 2014, by the time both the lines were operational, that there was even start of planning for a phase two, which is why we see such a big discord, right? The green line, which is the second line of Bangalore Metro's initial phase, was opened all the way back in 2011. But the construction and the infrastructure procurement for the yellow line, which is the first line of phase two, only started in 2019. So between these 8 years, there wasn't much that happened, and there was almost a break of sorts. So the planning for phase two only started around 2013, 2014, which is almost a good 7 year gap from 2006. So I think it was only around that time, around 2013, 2014, when the civic authorities realized that they were going to need a lot more than two lines to keep up with, and traffic and new commuter needs. And that's when the whole new set of planning started. Now the planning is in full swing because now there are, I think, 7 lines in the pipeline for Bangalore Metro, 3 in construction, 2 in planning, and 2 in the proposal stage. So yeah, now I think in the next few years we should see a huge flurry of Bangalore Metro lines opening up, hopefully. But yeah, otherwise I would like to read a little more on Delhi and come up with a more detailed answer and maybe write on this a little later.
And thanks for that answer, right? And I think it would be useful if you could keep on following your work on metro lines and the geopolitics of it. Maybe you can look at Kochi Metro, Lucknow Metro, Jaipur Metro, Delhi Metro, and we are having metro expansion in so many cities now, and see if a comparative study of these lines gives you some unique insights and lessons learned. Now, I'll just say one line before we conclude. It is very much possible that some of our listeners are actually traveling in the metro of any Indian city as they hear this out, or maybe even beyond India. Right? We have listeners joining in from across the world. So, if you are someone who's traveling in any metro right now, be it in Bangalore, Delhi, or any other city in the world, do reach out to us and let us know your views. What has your city done well? How's the metro coverage there? And have you ever thought about geopolitics impacting your commuter time before or not? So thank you so much, Tannmay. And thank you for all the listeners for joining in this episode of All Things Policy.
If you liked our show, dive into Takshashila's research on technology, strategy, and economic affairs. Check us out at our Twitter handle at Takshashila INST or our website takshashila.org.in.